I hope everybody made it through assignment number 3 or has started that and is going to get it turned in tonight. There's a lot of steps involved in that project, and some of the questions that have come up are people are trying to make a parameter for the curve, the 3 curves, and if you made the curve in a mass, you won't be able to create a parameter for that. So make sure you use an adaptive component. Generic model adaptive component family, like Jeremy does in the video, for the 3-point curve that flexes. Okay. I went ahead and took assignment 4 off the plate for this coming weekend, and I added the points to this assignment, this in-class assignment 5. It hopefully will give you a bit of a reprieve this weekend from doing work in this class, and it will also give you a chance, if you want, to redo or turn in an assignment that you missed or redo an assignment for more points. So I haven't thought through the details of how to turn that in, but because some people have used up their 2 turn-ins for both for the assignments on Blackboard, but if you haven't, you can just repost it to Blackboard by Tuesday of next class. So I'll remind people on Thursday as well. Today, we'd like to focus on structure for this building. We're going to look at doing some cross bracing in these columns here, and then putting in the roof beam and girders for the main roof, and then doing the beams and girders and columns for the second floor. Whatever we don't get through today in structure, I'll post the rest of it as a video, and please have it prepared for Thursday's class. And those that are going on that field trip Thursday for ID, you just have to watch the videos and catch up over the weekend. Alrighty, so we're going to start with creating a new family for the column top for these guys. So a connector between what will be structure for the roof and the columns. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up a new family type, and we're going to use a generic model face-based family type. So that's generic model face-based family. And if we look at this in 3D, we have a floor plate here that's just an extrusion that represents an object that you'll be it's just a representation of whatever you place this object on. So in elevation, we have a floor reference line, and then in floor plans, we also have the crosshairs. So we have a center left-right plane, working plane, and a center front to back working plane. And so basically we are trying to create a...
Which one did you choose for the family?
It would be a generic... Whoops. Can you go ahead and show him that? It's generic model face-based component. or family type. And so what we have, or what we want to build, is one of these guys, basically a cap to this column that then has a little post that'll support these I-beams. And we're going to make it parametric, so we're not super concerned about how tall this thing is, but we want like a substantial element there. So I'm going to make, and we loaded in a 10 by 0.55 column, so we want to basically create a cap that sits on top of that. So we're going to go ahead and start with creating an extrusion, and we're going to use the circle, and we're going to put the center point right on our crosshairs in our floor reference plane. And we're just going to draw a circle, and I'm going to go ahead and create a permanent dimension and add a new parameter and call it cap radius, or maybe we go exterior cap radius. Okay, and I'm going to go back to our modify, create extrusion, and we're going to create God, I always start with the wrong piece. Okay. Go ahead and create this one. Let's just put the check, and we're going to go to our back elevation view, and we're going to set up a couple reference planes. And we're going to do one below the reference level. This bottom one we want to name the base cap. This will be the top cap, and the top one, let's just name it top. And we can set a dimension between, we want to set a dimension between the lowest one, and we want to tab through to grab the reference plane. If you can see it, there's a light green dash line below the reference level plane. We want to select that to dimension from. So we're dimensioning to the green line, not that line there. And we're going to do another dimension from this green reference plane to this one as well, and then this one to that one. And now I'm going to use the align tool, AL, get you the align tool, and I'm going to align this middle plane here to the top of this cap, and I'm going to lock it down. I'm going to add a parameter to this right now that is cap, no spaces, thickness. And we can go ahead and make that just a 1-inch cap plate. I'm going to go ahead and select on this extruded plane, and I'm just going to temporarily hide it with my graphics down here and go hide element so that we can see what's going on here. We're going to make a cylinder here between these two reference planes, and so I've labeled this one B cap. So I can go ahead and set my reference working plane to that. Press OK. And I want to draw on my floor plan. So I'm going to open that view up. and I'm going to create another extrusion, and I'm going to match my same dimension here, and we're going to go ahead and use that same end cap radius of 1 foot for that dimension, and we're going to go ahead and create another circle within it. So we're making, a sleeve basically to go over the go over the column right now. And we're going to add this as a parameter too. Interior cap radius. Say okay. Then I'm going to go ahead in the Modify Create tab, create the extrusion, and let's go back to my rear elevation, and I can use the Align tool to again align this reference plane to the top of that guy and lock him down. So we just basically made a cap for this column here, and we want to add parameters to the thickness. So let's call that sleeve thickness. And now we can change that to being 6 inches. And we want to change our end cap radius to also being 6 inches, and our interior cap radius to be like 5.5 inches. So now we can use this reference plane, the top cap, and go ahead and set our working plane to the top cap reference plane. Click OK, and I want to work in my floor plan again. And we're going to make one more extrusion here. And just kind of making it somewhat proportional, not too concerned about the dimension. But we can go ahead and add a parameter to that as well as top radius. Click OK, and we can finish that and go back to our rear elevation, and with the Align tool you can go ahead and align that to the top reference plane and add one more parameter that says height for now is fine. And so we're pretty close here to what this looks like, but we're going to add one more detail, which is these bolts, these carriage bolts. And we want to add them and draw them on our left-right center plane. So I'm going to choose that as my working plane, and I'm going to open up my left elevation this time, and this is fairly just representative right now, so we just kind of want them sticking out a bit. And I made that a 1 inch radius, and I can copy this over and do a second one right here and just nudge it a little bit with the arrow key, but centered on our other reference plane, and click OK. And if we hide this, you'll see that it's not exactly where we want it, but we can use our arrows to just pull this thing out like this. And so it can start to represent those carriage bolts fairly easily. And you could do two separate ones if you wanted to, you know, and just do it like that on each side. But because I'm fairly lazy, this is representative enough of it. You're not going to be able to see what's inside this thing, and when you go to create a detail of it, you'll actually be using detail components to represent that through a section. So it's not a concern that this looks like this. Okay? And we just want to make sure that our height flexes as well to 10 inches, and it does. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a family. Just going to save it as column connection 3 for now. And we're going to go ahead and load that into our project. And you can see it starts to place on the face of anything. So it's not just, and that rectangle that I hid isn't there, it's just a representation of it. So you have a thing to base your family off of. And you can place it on a work plane or place on face. We want to choose place on face. If I go to my 3D view, it's kind of hard to get it to snap to the top of that in such an awkward angle. So if I exit out of the command and I'm in my 3D property viewport, I can turn on a section box. And what that allows me to do is start to section off parts of the building so that I can see in 3 dimensions a little bit easier what I want to model or start to use. So I go back to my architecture tab, and that's a component that we just made, and you can tab through here, hopefully. There we go. And place it, and then in my level 3 viewport I can temporarily hide my roof and now use the align tool to align this guy to the center. And we want our bolts to be going the opposite direction, so I can rotate that 90 degrees and then use the array command and grab the center point and snap midpoint is SM, and select that and then array it. I think it's 7 times. And so now we have that cap on there. But what I didn't do is add parameters to my materials. So I'm going to do that really quickly. And I'm just going to label 1 bolts and the other one material. Say OK and OK. Now I can load that back into the family and overwrite the existing version and its parameters, because we changed the material parameters of it. And I can finish this, and now all of those now have the capability to add a material to it. To save some time, I'm not going to add a material, but you're going to want to add some material to these 2 objects, So I think what I'm going to do is put a video up on YouTube to do the cross bracing here and create a little detail in here. It's going to take longer than I think I want it to. This object took a little longer than I thought it was going to take. Has everybody kind of started working on that little piece, that cap, or are you guys just watching? So we could take a 5-minute break and have people kind of catch up to this point, or I could just move on and you guys can get the majority of the idea of what we're trying to do. Try to catch up?
Yeah.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Is your recording paused?
No. Okay, so we went to architecture tab in our east elevation and we created a new reference plane, and I hid the fascia so that I could get the reference plane aligned to the bottom of our roof structure. Not our roof structure, but our roof itself. And I'm just dragging the nodes out here a little bit further so we can grab it a little bit easier. And I'm going to just label this roof structure. And so that's the plane we want to draw our roof structure on. You could, in theory, pick your roof plane as the structure, the bottom of it. And if you're in a hurry, that's a good way, but it's not the best way. The better way is to create a reference plane and use that as the drawing plane. So we're going to go ahead and set our reference plane to the roof structure. I'm going to click OK. And I want to draw on my reflected ceiling plan. So I'm going to choose that viewport, reflected ceiling plan level 2. And under the structures tab, we have what's called beam systems. And that allows me to basically draw an outline of where we want our beams to sit, and then define a spacing for them, and they just kind of automatically get drawn in at whatever spacing you set. And so first, that's nice to know. Let's make sure that our roof plane is still selected, roof structure. Okay. And we can now start to use our grid here. To create a rectangle where these are going to be placed. Now, the beam direction by default, I think, sits here. We don't want the beams to be spaced this direction. We want them to go this way. And so we need to pick the beam direction tool and select a new direction to set these beams. And we have in our properties, we have a layout rule, and we want to do a fixed distance, and we want the justification to be center. And our spacing is going to be our 16 feet 4 inches, because that's what our columns are spaced at. And typically, this is where if you had loaded multiple beam types in, they would appear here under the properties. We can change that after we draw this as well. But we pretty much want to just stick with our wide flange 12 by 26. So I'm going to click check. And you notice I can't see my beams. If I type VV in as a quick key, it opens up the visible graphics of the reflected ceiling plan. And if I scroll down, structural framing is unchecked. So if I check that and hit apply, you'll see these black lines came in that are over top of the grid lines. In our viewport, we have a coarse, medium, and fine detail level. We have to set that to fine in order to see those beams come in, see those beams. So same thing with any other viewport. Beams, you have to have the viewport set. Beams or columns, any structure, basically you need to set this to fine in order to see them. So if we switch back to our east elevation, you'll see that they're sitting pretty much where we want them to. They're sticking out a little bit too far in the back and maybe too far in the front as well. So let's just make an adjustment. If we tab through, do it in 3D. Let's temporarily hide the roof. If we tab through, you see I can select those dotted blue lines, those dashed blue lines. That's the structural beam system. And so we can edit the boundary just a bit. So maybe pull this back a little bit and pull this guy so that he's aligned with the interior wall. What? You hate that. You could have it sit right on top, but it's nice to have a little extension on it. And so now let's go back to the east elevation, and you can see that it's pulled back slightly from the roof plane, and it's now not sticking outside of our wall. And we can select on the individual beams and change their structural material if you wanted to independently. There's also other constraints in here. Start end extrusion. You can change the length of it manually for each beam if you wanted to. But it's also locked and pinned to that structural framing. So if you needed to move one for some reason, you'd have to unpin it in order to kind of start using these geometric positions in your properties for individual beams. And that's all we need to talk about for the moment for that. So we've created our girder system, but we still need some structure this way between the girders to support. So, oh, got a cramp in my foot. Any rate. We want to go ahead and load in a secondary beam type. And so if we go to our insert tab, we can load a family in, and we want to do a structural framing family, and we're going to use wood, and we're going to use a glulam western species. And again, similar to our columns, it gives us an array of choices. Pretty sure we want that one, but let me double check. Yeah, 2.5 by 7.5. And then also, while we're here, let's also load in, hitting the shift key, the control key, getting the 2.5 by 12 and the 2.5 by 7.5. So we're going to go ahead and load both of those families in. And I'm going to go back to my structure tab and create another beam system. and my working plane should still be the roof structure, so that's okay, that's great. And we're going to go ahead and draw another one of these here, and we can use our align tool to, well, we actually want to align that to the grid line so that it starts to look correct here, and use the align tool to align that. But we don't want our spacing to be 16 feet at this point. I'm going to go ahead and make it 16 inches, and we can change our beam type to being the 2.5 by 7.5 family, and go ahead and finish that. Where are you? Why aren't you showing up in this view? What was that? You got a suggestion? My view plane is too low? But I'm seeing these.
Well, you're seeing one, so.
So let's change our top primary view to unlimited. I went in the view properties of my ceiling plan template and changed the view range, the edit here. Changed both the top and view depth level to unlimited, and that allows me to see those beams. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that. So now that we have one drawn, we can select the beam system itself, and we can copy it. Copy command. Let's just go ahead and array it. That sounds like a better choice. Snap middle. Six times. And so we're starting to get a structure for this roof system. And we can reset our temporary hide to get our roof back. You can see now that this is starting to look fairly realistic as far as structure for this roof. The one last thing that we'd want to do is go ahead and we can select all these instances in the entire project. Really? This is killing me right now. Oh, huh. We have to edit the group. That would make some sense. And we can change our structural material. It doesn't look very realistic. So let's create a new material. And we want to change our appearance. You can use, grab an image and you can use this glue lamp texture that I provided you guys. and we're going to change the sample scale to 8 feet by 8 feet. Please change all of them. Just change the one. That's awesome. At any rate, that's awesome. We can now select. Thank you. Oh my goodness, I hate the array tool. I love it and hate it at the same time. So I selected all of those at once and was able to change the material of all of them. And you'll notice that they're offset, the distance is offset. God, this kills me. Ungroup, select. Why isn't it popping up? Alright, well, in the video I'll show you how to change that so that it's not offset from the structural material. So we want to go ahead and create a level 2. And we can see that this level 2 is 17 feet 2.5 inches off this grid line A. So let's just go ahead and create that now. You can change this temporary dimension to sit off the grid line by selecting that little blue dot. Allows me to change that. Let's make that a 3-inch concrete. Yeah, with metal deck. That sounds good. So that's really all we have time for today, unfortunately.
Now we have
Oh, good grief.
black markers up there, so we can write it on the board. Don't give it. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to come close to hitting
He
you.
doesn't play baseball.
Sports is not my strong suit. Oh, goodness gracious. Man, we're not getting through enough of this, but that's all right. So let's switch to our level 1 and let's place some columns here. And we're going to have to load in another family. So let's insert, load a new family in, and we want to go with structural columns. And we want them to be wood, but we want them to be round. So under the wood, we don't have a round column, unfortunately. So we're going to have to use a concrete column and change the material of it. We're going to go ahead and under structure, place columns, and I'm going to use my @grid lines again. going to select these grid lines. This drives me crazy. You notice they were all placed. For some reason, at some point in my life, I placed columns at that length and level, and I've never been able to change that placement. Drives me crazy.
We all have that problem.
So first change your top level to level 2, and then change that to 0. And hit apply. And you notice they're kind of sticking up into the concrete. It's not really what we want, so we can go ahead and attach the top to those. My floor says it's non-structural. So don't worry about that warning because it is non-structural. So we've got the concrete columns in there, and we can change their material as well here in the properties. And we're not going to find a good material, so I'm going to create a new material and rename this. Probably wood columns would help. And I'm going to use this column texture that I've created. And it's basically just like a plywood looking material, but we're going to stretch it out a bit. And I have to look at my other one here because I don't remember the exact detail of it. So let's make it 4 feet by 2 feet. Uncheck the link tool, and this will be 2 feet. 4 feet. So now we've got some columns that start look like wood timber. And so we're going to go back to, we're going to go to our ceiling plane, level 1. And now we want to create some structure here as well. And so our main structural is going to be girders basically between these walls and the columns, and then a secondary glulam spaced every 16 inches going this way. So we could do it in a couple ways, but we're going to use the beam tool, and want to use soft lumber, but we want to use our larger beam size. And we can go ahead and place one of these here. And it's referenced off level 1 at the moment. You see it drew it in the floor. We could change the height of it, leave it at reference level 1, and we can change the Z value. To 9 feet, and that's not quite tall enough. What did we set level 2 at? 12 feet, I believe. So the floor is like 5 inches thick, so let's try 11.6. And it's kind of hard for me to see what's going on through all those layers. So I'm going to use my section box here in my 3D view to go ahead and cut a section through my building so I can see what's going on 3D. And it's not quite there yet. So let's try 11.7. And that looks pretty good. So we can go ahead and use that same material that we made for our, what did we name that material for our glue lamb? Glue lambs. We can apply that same material to our glue lamb. And now back in our ceiling plan, we need to set up our visibility graphics so that we can see our beams. Structural framing. And change to fine. So we can start to see that guy there. And now we can copy him. I'm going to use the copy command because the array tool to me is the bane of my existence. And we're going to copy him multiple times here. So now we have the support basically in for these that will run in the other direction, and we can use a beam system in this case, and we can set that elevation now that we know what it is to 11.7 and draw a rectangular system here. Change our beam direction. Got our glue lamb western species. Make sure that it's the 7.5 because it's a slightly smaller beam, and we're spaced every 16 inches. And I'm just going to go ahead and select all in entire project again. Can't select all in entire project. It kills me because those are arrayed. It's always something. Let's try it this way. Use our filter command. Filter out what we don't want selected. Okay. Let's see what happens. So, some of them look screwed up and some of them are okay. Every once in a while Revit glitches and throws a wrench in there.
Are you cutting through that blue line?
I think I am. Let's just double check here. It's looking good. However, if a material isn't being applied correctly and you're using it elsewhere, you can always create a second material of the same material and rotate the texture pattern 90 degrees. And so we could go directly into our Manage tab and go directly to Materials and create a new material and rename it like Glue Lamb 2 and apply the same texture, but then, whoops, but you can rotate it here to 90 degrees, and we had this, what, at 8 feet by 8 feet. And so if you had one beam that wasn't working properly, you could change the material of that specific beam to this other material texture, so that you are using the same material, but it's just a different material, and it's positioned correctly. And this distance is probably okay, but you could also add another beam running through the middle. It's probably not needed, but if it was slightly larger and you weren't quite making the structural span with that depth and didn't want to make it a larger beam, you could always run another structural piece in here. So since we have 7 or 8 minutes, yes?
Before you stop recording, you want to explain why you don't want to duplicate a material? You want to create a new material? Because I guarantee you someone will do it.
All right. So if you duplicate a material by saying duplicate, just changing the name doesn't make a so what happens when you duplicate a material, it also duplicates the properties of that material, and whatever you make changes to this material, it'll change this material as well. So when you're always creating new materials,
It's a glitch. It makes
it's
no sense.
yeah, it's a glitch basically in Revit that if you duplicate a material and start to make changes to it, it'll do those changes to the material that you originally duplicated. So you always want to create a new material and rename it something else so that Revit doesn't get it confused with any other material in the material browser. That if you're looking for like similar properties, so we're just creating a new material, but we're not, it's not a very sophisticated material. Like, so you could add physical and thermal properties to a material. If you wanted to get the thermal properties of one of these other materials, like, so you see this, if I select common brick, you have like physical material information and thermal material information. If you wanted to create a new material and you wanted these properties, but you don't necessarily want to copy this material, when you create a new material, you can hit this little button and now apply the properties of that material to the new material without having to duplicate it and cause conflict between the two materials. It's a little more than I wanted to get into about that today, but hopefully you followed that. And that's not really, that's getting a lot further into materials than we want to in this class, but it's good to know.
One rule is just don't duplicate, always make new material. That's all. So you
Yeah.
remember.
So now that we have 5 minutes left, I'd like to get to the rest of the structure. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing the cross bracing here. And I'm just going to try and get through one of them, but then you can copy it over more or less. So we kind of want some rigidity between these columns, right? So if I flip to my south elevation and change my graphic view to fine, we can start to draw cross bracing in here through the structure tab. but I want to set my work plane to being this grid line D first before I do that. So I can set this, because we have these grid lines, we can use them as a working plane. And I want to open up my south elevation. Now in the structures tab, we have a structural frame brace tool. And we only have, whoops, wrong button. We only have these two in at the moment, but we can go ahead and load in So I went to structural framing and steel, and there should be a pipe in here somewhere. Round bar. And went ahead and opened that. And now we can draw with a 1-inch bar. We could edit that if you wanted it to be thicker, duplicate it, and create this is a parameter for that round bar. It's radius, or actually, it's not its radius, it's the thickness of it. But we can start to draw cross bracing in. If I select that, I can use the mirror, not the mirror by axis, but just drawing an axis. And I can get the center point of that guy and mirror him so that I have cross bracing that's centered in there now. You can copy this over, but yeah, we're gonna go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to use the top of my whatchamacallit, this connection piece as my reference point. And I have it clicked on multiple, so I can go in here. And I didn't array this because I actually want to make a custom connection here. And so I want to be able to edit each one of these without having to click on this edit group like I had to, because I arrayed this as a group. And we don't have enough time to do that, but it'll be in a video where we're going to create a donut basically like we did in the mass and revolve a circle and then connect these into the circle so it's not an X anymore, it's an X with a circle in it, then attaches. Just a little more detail. So I'll post that video later today. But try and catch up all of what we've done today for Thursday so we can move on to interior stuff like stairs and railings. Yeah.
You forgot to record all that.